If you're like me, it can be really hard to keep all the different groups of elves straight in your mind. So I thought it would be helpful to have a visual breakdown of all the clans of the elves with explanations of how they came to be. So today on Nerd of the Rings, I present to you a complete guide to Tolkien's elves. When the Quendi, or elves, awaken in Middle-earth in the year of the trees 1050, there are a total of 144. They call themselves Quendi, which means who speak with voices, as they met no other living thing that spoke or sang. The elves consist of 3 clans. 14 make up the Minyar, which means firsts. 56 are the Tatyar, meaning seconds. And the largest group at 74 is the Nelyar, meaning, you guessed it, thirds. They also refer to themselves as the Lindar, or singers, because they are known for their beautiful voices. Or maybe it's because they didn't care to be known as thirds. After Orome discovers the elves in the year of the trees 1085, he invites them to live in Valinor. A little less than half decide to follow the huntsman, including all 14 of the Minyar, half of the Tatyar, and 46 of the Nelyar. The elves who decide to take the journey are collectively called the Eldar by Orome, which means people of the stars. The 82 that remain behind are known as the Avari, which means the unwilling. Many of the Avari were fearful and distrusting of Orome and the Valar after hearing the lies of Melkor. While some of this group would eventually make their way westward, it is believed that some are captured by Melkor, who tortures and corrupts them to create the race of orcs. Now back to the Eldar. So we have the Minyar, the Tatyar, and the Nelyar making the journey. During the course of this journey, Orome would give each clan new names. The Minyar become the Vanyar, the Tatyar become the Noldor, and the Nelyar become the Teleri. Orome leads the Eldar north of the Sea of Helkar, and they pass by the ruins of the battle between Melkor and the Valar. At this point, some of the elves flee out of fear, and nothing else is known about them, though it's possible they return to join the Avari. Years later, Orome and the Eldar pass through Greenwood. They rest by the shores of the Anduin River, while the huntsman tries to determine how he will get the elves over the Hithyglir, what would later be known as the Misty Mountains. These mountains were considerably taller in the early days of Middle-earth. In the year of the trees 1115, Orome returns and takes them by the High Pass, the very same pass that would border Rivendell ages later. As most of the group presses on, a group of the Teleri goes south. This group is known as the Nandor, meaning those who go back. From the Nandor, we get the Sylvan Elves, or Wood Elves, who would inhabit the later realms of Mirkwood and Lorien. Later, some of the Nandor would make their way into Beleriand and live in Ossiriand. These elves are known as the Laiquendi, or Green Elves. Once again, we return to the main group of the Eldar. They pass through Eriador on what would one day be known as the Great West Road. In 1125, the Vanyar and the Noldor cross the Arid Luin and reach Beleriand. The Teleri, meanwhile, are lagging behind in Eriador. As we know by now, if you don't keep up with the main pack, you're gonna get a new name. So this is the actual moment when the Nelyar become known as the Teleri. In 1128, the Teleri finally enter Beleriand. During this time, their leader Elwë, later known as Thingol, meets and falls in love with the Maya, Melian, in the forest of Nan Elmoth. Trapped in an enchantment of their own making, they would not be seen for over 200 years. In 1132, the Vanyar and the Noldor are taken across the sea on Tol Eressëa, an island which the Vala Ulmo uses to ferry the elves across the sea. The Teleri are too far away and don't hear the summons of Ulmo. In the meantime, some Teleri come to the shores of Beleriand, where they come to love the sea. Ulmo returns for the Teleri in 1150, and most of them take the trip to Valinor. However, some of the Teleri remain behind once again, becoming the Sindar, or Grey Elves. While some of the Sindar would settle in realms like Mithrim or Doriath under a reappeared King Thingol, another group settles on the shores of Beleriand in a region called Falas. They become known as the Falathrim, and Círdan is their lord. Meanwhile, in Aman, we now have the entire groups of the Vanyar and Noldor, as well as a group of the Teleri. These Teleri are also known by the name Falmari. Back in Middle-earth, all the clans of the elves who do not make the journey to Valinor, that is the Avari, the Silvan elves, the Laiquendi, the Sindar, and the Falathrim, are collectively known as the Morquendi, the Elves of Darkness. Now these are not dark elves in the sense of being evil, but they are simply Umanyar, not of Aman. They are dark elves in the sense that they never beheld the light of the two trees in Valinor. Together, the Vanyar, Noldor, and the Falmari are called the Laiquendi, the Elves of Light, or Light Elves, as they have seen the light of the two trees and lived in the Blessed Realm. These elves and their descendants would come to be known as the High Elves, according to the Dunedain. While the Vanyar and a handful of the Noldor will remain in Aman forever, most of the Noldor will return to Middle-earth and become among the most famous elves of the coming ages. Feanor, Fingolfin, Finrod, Galadriel, Turgon, Gil-galad, Celebrimbor, and so many others that will eventually have videos of their own here on the channel. Among the Sindar, we get elves like Luthien, Beleg, Thranduil, and Legolas. And of course, there will be a number of elves who will be a mixture of these clans, like Elrond and his twin brother Elros, who are descended not only from the Vanyar, Noldor, and Sindar, but also Amaya and all three houses of the Edain, the great men of the First Age. So that was a lot of names. Feel free to watch the video again anytime you need a refresher on the clans of the elves. If there's another complex area of Tolkien's lore that has you stumped, recommend it in the comments for a future video. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters, including Gail Elizabeth, Tom DeBombadil 19, Sky Carcass, Salim Rahman, Jim Limber Davis, Smorzerk, Matt Schultz, Zetrock, Gimilcod, Game Strategy Nerd, and Debbie. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.